This question ties into that fairly nicely because I think it talks about how you how you ended up finding your own way. The question is about the radio programs and your the first recording you remember. Because I know that you ended up being involved with radio professionally at some point, and then but growing up and listening to radio programs, what was that? What impact did that have on you?
Listening to what programs?
Radio programs, any radio programs.
Well, when I started college, at Kansas University, that's all we could afford. All I could afford. When I started college, I had no intention of being a musician. The idea of foreign travel was keen for me. I don't know why. I'd listened to an awful lot of radio growing up about Europe and South America to some extent too. I thought I'd like to be a journalist in maybe South America. So my first two courses in summer school, the summer after I graduated in June 1946 at Kansas State University, were typing and Spanish. Those were my first two courses in college. The typing still serves me, thank you very much, very well. I can't speak a word of Spanish, much more than a word of Spanish. And as a matter of fact, before I was done with it, I went out of a Spanish class into a French class, or out of a French class into a Spanish class, and I can't remember or speak either one of them. I never used them.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things that I was doing other things early. One of the things that I did in college to escape music was even though you can't tell it right now because of the what do you call it, cedar fever that's got my voice going. I've always had a very good, easy to use, and a relatively expressive speaking voice of some depth and some good quality, and I realized early on that I could do something in broadcasting. Kansas State University, WKSU, they had a university, what they call closed circuit radio station, which means that it only broadcast through the wiring system of the university on the campus. Later on, it has since become quite a significant beyond that. But I started working in radio then. This is in the days when everything was live. There was nothing recorded. There weren't any recorders except for big transcription discs, 16-inch transcription discs, which some programs were recorded on. Tape recorders had not been invented yet. Wire recorders hadn't even been invented yet, and that's what makes me sort of compulsive about knowing what time it is, because I can still see the second hands and getting a point and knowing when to go on the air. And so I started doing that early in my life. I guess I was still a teenager, 18 or so, when I was doing that, and learned I was pretty good at it.
What kind of broadcasts were they, like news or sports or
a little bit of this,
programs?
a little bit of that, a certain amount of dramatic programming, interestingly enough, and which I did two things. I learned how to do a little bit of acting on a microphone, learned how to do a little bit of sound effects, real sound effects, make them up so they sound like real sound effects. Also, I was very good at flying a 78 RPM disc and cueing it in with a little magic marker in a certain spot, then backing it up and cueing it up, and live adding proper music to certain moments in a dramatic show.
Really? Yeah.
And so I got pretty skillful at all that kind of stuff, which served me well when I got into the Army eventually. My last tour of duty in the Army, my last duty assignment was with the Armed Forces Radio Service, Far East Network in Japan. And I was always able to use that. And when I came out of the Army, I could support myself partially by being in broadcast pretty well for a while. and doing an awful lot of contract acting and voice acting and a little bit of television and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
But that's how it started.
Yeah. So when you went off to university, that was sort of the first steps of you. You talk about kind of going off, and the way you put it sounds like, you know, kind of starting off on your own, away from your brother and away from your parents, and that was sort of the beginning of it. What else? I mean, so starting broadcasting. What else did you do?
That's a little complicated because you might as well know this part of the story too. I lived at home, and somehow or other, I had at one point in time. As a matter of fact, while we're still in Houghton, New York, upstate New York, before my father went to Kent State University, I had picked up, my father had it in the corner of one of his rooms. He had a cello standing there. Mm-hmm. And somewhere along the line, I started playing cello. And sometime during that first year at Kent State University, I decided, well, you know, I really am pretty good at music too. I really ought to do what I can with this. I don't know how my father did it, but he made some sort of a connection with Oberlin Conservatory, part of Oberlin College, mm-hmm. up the road a piece, a few miles away from Kent. And we applied, I got in and was admitted as a cello major. But I was not up academically or skill set wise to be able to qualify. So after 1 year, back to Kent State University. Mm-hmm. That's when I started doing a lot of broadcasting. Okay. At that time. Yeah. And then I realized I needed to get into the Army. It was going to come up sooner or later anyway. The draft was still going then. So I joined the Army. Mm-hmm. And that's when I became self-supporting.
Mm-hmm. Not to be rude to you guys, but we're coming up to 5 minutes left on the end of this tape. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. Well,
Are you still rolling?
Yeah, I am.
All right.
All right. Well, let's. Here's a quick one. I think the original question was the radio you heard in the house growing up as a boy, and what you heard, like the radio broadcasts and the music, and the first recording you remember hearing your father playing in the home, and what kind of equipment.
The equipment, the radio that we had in Manhattan on West 55th Street. Now, those are the years when I was, I'm guessing, third grade through 7th grade, maybe, mm-hmm. about that time. We had one of these big cabinets, RCA Victor. What else was there? Mm-hmm. There were a lot of other things, but that's what we had, was an RCA Victor radio, old-fashioned radio. Mm-hmm. And we listened to the broadcasts on the New York Philharmonic broadcasts routinely every week. The Metropolitan Opera broadcasts, it was a rule. Saturday, mm-hmm. we listened to the opera. But he also had a record player as part of that setup, mm-hmm. and that's what we listened to the records on.
Do you remember the first record you ever heard, or any of the
no,
particular
but
broadcasts that stood out?
No, that's a good question. I really don't. I do remember some of the recordings. Mm-hmm. One of the first ones that really stood out for me was the Rachmaninoff theme on a theme variations on Paganini, which is a big orchestra piece with piano. Rachmaninoff was one of the world's greatest pianists. Mm-hmm. And it was a recording, I remember, by Leopold Stokowski and the Philadelphia Orchestra with Rachmaninoff playing the piano. And it was it's long enough, so it was a multi-recording set. So, you know, you play, 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is, and it fades out, and then the next one fades in about the same place. And my father was an avid collector of records. I don't know how he afforded it, honestly don't. But he also was an avid collector of scores, the orchestral scores, which were published in what they call miniature versions, literally small print of a full orchestra score. When a conductor conducts an orchestra, scores this tall. Woodwinds, percussion, brass, violins, violas, cellos, all the strings, and solo piano somewhere in there. Complicated, and it's complicated music. He had the score for that music, and he put it in my hand. Says, "Here, read this. There it is. There's this follow." And really, within a few days, I was reading orchestral scores and understanding exactly what was going on, what they meant, what to do with it, what a conductor would do it, because my father was a conductor. Understood that. He used to take us to symphony concerts at NBC. Toscanini conducting the NBC orchestra, and we go and he had, because of his academic teacher, college, university teaching business, that he would get tickets. So he'd take me or my brother or both of us, and we'd go to concerts. And so I really learned to listen. But how did we get to that question? I can't remember. How did you ask that question?
Wartime broadcasts and
the broadcasts really were just an expansion of that. And so early on, I was listening to music broadcasts a lot. But I also listened during World War II to that same radio setup, because it went with us to Hope. We listened to everything that was going on, and there weren't, nowadays, you've got how many hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many it is, sources for information, news, music, and so forth, right? Not then. There were about 3 or 4 or 5 choices. Mutual Broadcasting, National Broadcasting, American Broadcasting, ABC now. I forget, that was just about it.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 or 2 others that I don't remember. And so all the broadcasting, whether it's news or music or anything else, drama, all came on those channel sources. That's all. And so that's what we listened to. But yeah, I remember. I remember the Edward R. Murrow during World War II. I remember the Edward R. Murrow broadcast from London, where he was on a rooftop watching the bombs drop, German bombs drop. And I can remember that droll voice. And for, a youngster, where you have a fertile imagination anyway, the imagination would play big time, because you didn't see you never saw pictures. Much more imagination plays with just radio, by a long shot.
Yeah.
I'm going to call that a good stopping point. We're at 0.
Okay.
So. All right.